Oh, here it is. So any like general first thoughts about it?
Yeah, I could share some general first thoughts about the book. The theme for the book, I feel like, with a lot of different people, there were real, actual basketball, NBA, and basketball, I guess, too, people, was that they're trying to improve the game for the fans, not necessarily for the coaches and the players, even, but not for the coaches. It's more like, let's make this game a good game, especially that guy that made the shot, that invented the shot clock, the 24 seconds. It came with 24
Yeah,
seconds for the shot clock. It's like, he didn't even care about trying to his team to win. He just wanted the product to be entertaining, which I guess would make more money for him anyway. And it was just a side business at the time. But anyway, he was hoping for the help the fans out, not the play, not his chances of winning the title that year or whatever. So and and another thing this book made me think about is that current and future generations are going to innovate and change the way the game is played. Like we just saw the 3 point revolution finally happen after 40 something years of there being a 3 point line. But in the past few years. But more stuff is going to happen. I think that's what I predict because it's just so much change has happened over so many decades. Stuff is like the. I didn't even realize that there was no jump shot for 4 decades.
right.
There was no jump shot, and the history in this book was pretty entertaining or interesting to see like all these different changes that happened over time. And those are my two main like theme type deals that I saw for a couple different chapters. But yeah.
I mean, I for me, like I thought the weird history stuff, like the stuff about like the peach baskets being up on the balconies was really funny and like engaging and like you said, the stuff about Biasone, who was the shot clock inventor, and how all of this stuff, I guess we'll like get to it as we go through this, but how all of this stuff kind of came about because people were trying to like either, work around the rules or like reinterpret the rules. Um, which I think is interesting contextually because like this year there's that new flopping rule, which he does talk about flopping specifically in here, but I think that'll be sort of an interesting one to watch as far as like will somebody come up with like a whole new kind of cheat on that one that's going to fly under the radar kind of thing. I guess like for me, this was the first book that we've read that I was like, I probably could have written this book. Like, like it just goes and talks to all these people and like all the people are great, but I'm not sure that I needed all the people. Like there was a lot. But the underlying structure of how he talks about like the different, especially the history, I think was fascinating. I love like timeline history. Um, and just how he's so sort of like irreverent and reverent to Naismith at the same time. Like how, Naismith's like first 13 rules, like none of them really exist anymore because they just weren't that good, you know? But he gives them a lot of credit for it. So, yeah, that's my initial kind of overview thought, I think. Let me blast through some of these. Like I said, just stop me anywhere. Like if you have extra thoughts on, I don't know how fast I can go through it. And it's the whole book right here. So if this is sucking, let me know. I did pull on YouTube. There's this audio interview with James Naismith on the radio, it's just cool to hear his voice. So that's in my thread somewhere if you ever want to go watch it. And like I think we all kind of know this first part where he talks about like the cages around the courts, why it was invented. Um, and then yeah, a lot of like you said, the embellishment may have also been down to the fact the first game was extremely boring. Um, Hopes I have this thing in front of that right there. Ooh, let's see. I'm gonna have like there we go. Let's see if I can get back there. It finished with a score of 1-0, and the student named William Chase hit the only basket on a desperate heave from 25 feet. All shots were worth 1 point. So it seems like a lot of the development and evolution has been to make it more fun and more entertaining to watch. Like, I like that he gives the the perspective of the observer, right? Not just the player. Like, I feel like so much of what we've read is about the players and their development, but he gives a lot of like credit to people who are watching the game, to the point where he was like talking about how Joan Crawford might have been more astute at understanding what would make the game better, than the people who were actually involved in the game. I like the balconies being 10 feet high was totally interesting. I'd never heard that before. And that's stuck all these years and hasn't changed.
Yeah, I remember a lot of people talk about, WNBA, they should change the height of the basket or whatever. But I think that the fact that the 10 feet has been a thing in basketball since the very start makes it, a little disrespectful if they change that just to like help increase scoring for the women's game.
Yeah.
I think that isn't the 10-foot basket height the only dimension that's still the same from the original game?
I think you're right. I was trying to, there might be one other one, but I mean, they've changed the key, so they've changed the paint a bunch of times.
Right.
They've changed the size of the court. They've changed, I think they've changed almost everything else. Obviously, the one thing he didn't really talk about, unless I missed it, was the advent of the hole in the bottom of the hoop, right?
Yeah.
I think we briefly talked about it. The one thing that I did find really interesting in all of that was, how he would have wanted square peach basket or square baskets, 18 by 18, and they didn't have them. And so we've got round baskets. Here you go. And that's just such like an integral part to the game, was just an accident. It's just all of these little things all along the way that were either accidental or happenstance. It's just really, really fascinating. And just so coincidentally, the 18 by 18 box that he wanted ended up being an 18-inch diameter circular basket. It's just full of a lot of these cool like little idiosyncrasies to the game that really adds a lot. Like when we watch the games now, to think through some of the history and like why it is the way that it is. It's really cool. This book was really, really cool. And all
I think right now is a particularly interesting time during summer to think about NBA rules, because oftentimes there's FIBA, right? So we get to think, when we're watching FIBA basketball, we are explicitly seeing a different view set of rules. They're a lot pretty similar, obviously, because you can transition from FIBA to NBA and vice versa and still be an elite athlete. But it's interesting how we don't think about rules when we tend to watch the game, but all these small little details make a huge difference in the way the game is played. And it's interesting to see all the impacts the rules actually have on the game.
For sure. And okay, so we started with Sprawl Ball, and he has a really great diagram set of like how the game responded, especially to George Mikan. And then actually I was randomly watching the podcast episode with Tyrese in it, and Tyrese was talking about that the whole time that he was growing up, he didn't do any weightlifting at all. Like he was like, no, I'll do double court instead. So he would just do the Mikan drill over and over and over again, which I don't even know what the Mikan drill is, but I thought that was hilarious in the context of this book, is that so many things are tied so directly historically to players and events, but I'm not even sure that like the players themselves are aware of them all, but yeah, totally fascinating. The whole dribbling thing is
that was really interesting.
Imagining them trying to dribble with like a ball with like a seam down it, so it's like going in all different directions and stuff. it makes it even funnier to me.
And to like watch back at like really old basketball games from like the 30s, 40s, and 50s where you see them dribbling and shooting, and they look just so, it's like not even pleasing to the eye to watch them dribble it, all the way to their head, and like all these push shots, and you think that, oh well, all of these things that we take for granted, like even the jump shot and all these things, like they evolved over time, and at one point somebody did this for the first time, and it was either immediately outlawed because, hey, you can't do this, this is cheating for X, Y, or Z reason, or people really took notice, and like even something like in the dribbling chapter where they're talking about all of these, the quote about the Yale the future corporate lobbyists or whatever the quote is was.
Let me see if I can find. Let me see if I can get that. Well, I did. I wanted to just
white shoe litigators or something like that.
White shoe litigators. I listened to this book a couple of times. I read it for the first time about a year and a half ago, and every single time, like this, there's no basketball book that makes me laugh harder than this one. This guy's he's hilarious.
I might have gone past it. I wanted to like definitely like the parts that he talks about how this guy Genzaburo happened to be like one of his students, was like a Japanese exchange student, and took the game back to Japan with him. Like that's another completely random event, and they're saying the game was probably played in Japan as early as 1900. So here was a referee who was born 7,000 miles away from Springfield YMCA, and he's interpreting a version of the game rules Naismith had jotted down 45 years before that trip to Europe. Like he talks about like the global reach, right? Like how it's spread. And I think, like we were talking about it being fun and it being entertaining to watch and it being also a good spectator sport. And I think obviously those elements have to be there for it to successfully translate in all these different situations. I know I highlighted all the Yale stuff, but that was like my favorite part of the whole book, I'm pretty sure, is just talking about their innovation. They talk a lot about like, if you change everything, is it the same sport? Is it the same boat, right? Which, yeah, it is. That's part of the beauty of it, right? Is it's always changing. And, I'd love to see it move more towards like a FIBA style. Personally, like it is so much, there are so many less game stoppages. Like I watched the game today and there's just less calls for number one and less reviews, and it just flows so much better. But I would say that the one thing in FIBA that I think is really noticeable is there's still the dominance of the big man. Like to me, USA has looked better than everybody else because they have real forwards and they have Jaren. And it's like most other teams just don't have that. Yeah, I might not be able to find the Yale stuff. I'll just keep going anyways.
I think the ship of Theseus parallel here is really fascinating because basketball really is an interesting twist on that, because like the 13 rules, like I think he said in the book there's only one rule. I don't even remember which one it is. That's still the same from the 13 original rules, and like almost everything about the game has changed. Is it still the same game? Well, if we still think of it as the same game, and it has that same essence, like that's a really interesting twist on the answer to that ship of Theseus like thought experiment.
Yeah, And it does apply to so many other things, right?
Yeah.
But it's absolutely fascinating to apply it here, I think. And so Frias mentions soccer, which sprouted from various ancient games, but is still evolving. When he watches matches from the 50s and 60s, he can't ignore that they appear to be, by his estimation, at least 80% different from their modern iterations. How do we determine that sport is still soccer? But we give the sport a name, and as long as people identify it with that name and call it that name, then it is that sport. I don't agree with that position. It's funny. It's also very funny that they used the soccer ball to begin. You know, there was no such thing as a basketball, obviously. Yeah, I thought that was a really interesting conundrum. And then he does talk about Naismith's book, its origin and development, which I might be interested in reading at some point. But it sounds like it's actually a heavily edited retelling that's twice removed from its original source. Sorry, my son's getting ice. It's like insanely loud. I've never noticed it before. It serves as a decent metaphor for basketball itself, a sport that in its current form looks absolutely nothing like the game Naismith invented. And then he talks a lot about how in Naismith's, like, both in his the radio interview that he did and in his book, he seems to, like, maybe not tell the whole truth or, like, misremember some of the facts about the actual events as they were recorded by other people, and he didn't seem to take it, like, super seriously, or as seriously as you would think somebody who, like, did he ever know that he invented, like, $1 billion mega game? You know what I mean? Or was he like, oh cool, people are having fun playing it?
Well, I mean, when did he died? Like, what, in the 50s? Sometime in the 50s, right?
Yeah.
And the NBA really didn't even take off, I mean, until, what, the 60s? I mean, and even then it didn't really take off until like the 80s, when they had more live playoff games on TV. And so
Yeah.
Naismith would have had no idea. And like, I think it's so fat throughout the whole book. I guess I missed this when we first started talking about, like, my big takeaways, but this is a key takeaway for me, is that, like, the game since its inception has been filled with a bunch of people with very altruistic intentions, right? Like Naismith, he created the game to, just promote physical fitness and keep these educators busy. And then, was it Biasone? He created the shot clock so it would be more entertaining, and you had all of these people all throughout the way that just wanted something more fun. It wasn't about money, and Naismith didn't. I don't think he probably earned much, if anything, off of his invention.
Yeah.
I mean, it's so pure, and it's.
But even when he was alive, he was still able to witness some pretty important parts of the growth of basketball. I think I'd call it, like, you have a sport you made go and play in the Olympics, right? You go to Europe to see countries play against each other. I think I'd consider that sport big by then, right?
Yeah.
Like by the time you're in the Olympics, I think you made it.
That's a great point. The Olympics would be.
And when did they start, like, having it as, like, a main pillar of college basketball? I wonder. I mean, I don't know if it says in this book, but I feel like that was in the 30s, maybe. I know in Pete Carrill's book, he talks about introducing the shot clock into the game while he's coaching the college game. So anyways, I don't know the date of that, but I think maybe that may have happened during Naismith's lifespan as well. This has struck me as funny. It hadn't occurred to Naismith that people would actually practice his game. Foresight, it turns out, is not an essential quality in an inventor. So here's all the dribbling stuff. The Yale basketball team didn't acknowledge that they were breaking the rules when they started dribbling. This was around 1896. They did it under the guise of passing to themselves. A clever workaround, the kind of sly approach you would expect from a team of future white shoe litigators and society page heavies. It's hilarious. Except for the fact that dribbling was a fantastic idea. It just that really is my favorite part. It's just imagining, them like.
And they thought about it as passing to themselves initially. I guess
That's hilarious.
you can't. You got to pass to yourself. Okay.
They were adhering to the rules, but they were subverting the expectations of how those rules would be followed, right? Like my mind goes immediately to Allen Iverson, the hang time dribble, that side hang time dribble that he had, that people were like, what in the hell is he doing? Like, and they actually had to like make a rule about it, like, no, you can't have hang time more than like 1 second or it's a travel, but it's so funny. Dribbling was hardly a natural maneuver until 1929. Players tended to bounce with caution, but a few rogue souls experimented with trick dribbling, crisscrosses, and other moves that are now considered normal but were perceived as a kind of sorcery back then. And then he goes into the whole Marcus Haynes stuff, and he does the magician shop, which I thought was interesting. Like they're talking about, is it like an illusion? Is it a trick? Or is it a technique, right? Can you achieve it with like practice? Or is it something that you have to have like a sleight of hand? So that I thought was relevant and interesting. They talk about the Chris Paul's sort of his boomerang dribble. I don't know what it's actually called. He says it in here, but I can't remember.
Yo-yo. Yeah.
Yeah. And then the sham god stuff later on in here. But it's like all of this stuff kind of came about, like Chris Paul's came about because they switched balls, right? So they were using a different ball. They switched from like Wilson to Spalding or Spalding to Wilson or something. And the ball felt totally different. And he figured out he could do this trick. And, but then when they switched back, he kept practicing it until he could do it with the new ball as well, or the old ball, as it were. There's no secret to magic. Everything you see in magic today is simply an adaptation of an old principle.
Of the people they've invited to talk about this book, I think the game designers and the magicians are probably the most interesting of the people that were invited, because I think they provide insight that most of the others don't really. I think looking at basketball through the perspective of games, like how people create rules, is fairly important, and it's not a perspective I ever would have considered, because basketball is a sport, it's existed for a long time. I don't think about it as an artificial game, but it is. So you can look at things that way. And then obviously the magician there's a lot of stuff, that tricks that are played on the court to deceive others. And sure, I mean, once you get good enough, it stops working. It stops deceiving people. Everyone on the court recognizes all the tricks. But every now and then you'll get something like a Jokic behind the back pass, nutmeg, or whatever, and it genuinely does trick everyone, and those are magical moments.
Yeah, I really appreciated it's at the end of the book, but he talks to one of the other people that he talks to that I thought was really interesting and relevant was the ad sales guy, and I found myself thinking about that over and over and over again, of like this idea that you have like this optimal like segment of time that captures people's attention. Like I think in our life and society, like we're so used to like these like really sample size interactions like on social media, at the grocery store, you know, where it's like very brief kind of like processing of information. Even like I think most people's consumption of like analytics and stuff like that tends to be more in the form of like an article rather than a book. And where he talks about like how there was like you can have like a 30-second spot or a 45-second spot or a minute spot. Like what the hell am I going to do with a minute? A minute is too long, right? That I found really interesting, especially since I've been trying to make like successful shorts and stuff like that. And I think about my own, you know, attention span. Like I feel like this book club has actually helped me have a longer attention span because I have to pay more attention for a longer amount of time. Like I really felt like social media was decaying my ability to retain information that I read, especially in a long form format. But I feel like doing this has like brought me back to like, no, I actually do have really good reading retention, you know, and I can maximize it and take good notes and stuff like that. So anyways, I found that one fascinating. And then the other one at the very end where they're talking about, which they kind of did in the breaks of the game too, but where they talk about like the slow-mo and the instant replay and how it relates to like Michael Jordan. That part, I just like how they're manipulating time to emphasize feats of impossibility. And like, to me, that's so magical, right? Like even when you are in the arena, you watch the Jumbotron to like verify that what you saw actually happened, right? I mean, which is incredible. Like, I think that's such a fascinating. I love this too. This line of thinking is echoed in the story of how Shamgar invented his famous technique. I did it by mistake, he admitted in an interview. I watched the move on film and thought, hey, this could work. And then went to the gym and practiced it over and over and over again. I had to practice it thousands of times before I could do it in the middle of a game. I think that's so cool. Like that's such a different mindset than I have about anything. Is like see something that you think it might be impossible and think like, I could do that maybe. I'm going to practice it 1,000 times. Like that is insane, right?
I think that certain NBA players, Steph Curry and Luka Doncic in particular, they practice trick shots when no one else does. And then eventually when they get good enough at it, so they are able to pull it off in game, and it's incredible.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I mean, I think, you know, what was it? It was the spatial analytics book that we read where I think it was that book, or maybe it was another one. Anyways, somebody talked about basketball like an iceberg, right? Like you seeing the actual game that they're playing is only like 20% of what, you know, of the training and the practice and the treatments and like all the other stuff that happens on a basketball team is this like part of the iceberg that's completely underwater and you don't see it at all, you know? And it makes me think of that as well. As it's just like sometimes you see things like that and you don't, or like Michael Jordan. I mean, Michael Jordan did like 2 impossible things every single game. And you don't think like, oh, he practiced that, you know? You think like, oh my God, he did an impossible thing. Yeah, so the time clock stuff, again, this also was fantastic. The stuff about Biasone, like making himself like an assistant coach was hilarious.
Yeah,
that was great. I put that on Twitter. I took a picture of my book and put it on Twitter.
It's great. I mean, he's like a professional, like at getting around the rules, right? That's the whole bag, like, which is fantastic. And I love that, like,
well, I think I think part of the point of that was also that he was getting what he wanted. He was doing whatever he needed to do to get what he wanted to happen.
Yeah.
Which was to be able to yell at the refs. in this
Yeah.
case. And then the next case was to get an entertaining game instead of the 19-point fiasco that they had before. So recently.
There wound up being 6 overtimes, meaning that in 30 minutes of action, the teams combined to take only 6 total shots.
I have a question for you guys. What did you think about the almost kind of obsession with the number 24? I don't think the number 24 is particularly holy. It's napkin math, right? And,
yeah.
And I think if you had a faster clock, it'd be a faster paced game. If you had a slower clock, you'd get a slower paced game. I don't think there's anything special about 24, but I think the author really tried to indicate that there was.
I agree with you that I don't think it's special, but I'm not sure I remember him kind of, giving it sainthood, 24 giving it, making it most important thing.
There's a paragraph that he talks about that. Let me see. Shot clock. So the shot clock's effects were immediate and dramatic. Scoring increased by again, every time I go look for something, I probably won't be able to find it. But yeah, he talks about how the entire game is now broken down into 24-second segments. I don't know if I totally agree with that. But the fact.
Well, I mean, what do you mean? You mean different leagues? Because except for college NC2A, a lot of them do 24
seconds. Right?
Yeah. Except for NC2A, a lot of them do 24. Yeah. I mean, I think it's just napkin math is the guy, the owner. I can't say his name. He liked the games that were like that, and he thought they were fun, and he was right. They were probably pretty generally entertaining. So he just did the math, and that came up. But if you want to do 22 or 26, it probably wouldn't be that much different. It's just
it's kind of one of those kind of things. Is 24 seconds important because that's the number that they used, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, what if they would have used 30 seconds? So you can break the game down into 30-second segments too.
Yeah. So first time I read this, it was in the middle of college basketball season, and I realized just how different the feel of the game is, the strategy, everything in college basketball because of the 30-second shot clock. There's a lot more stalling. It's slower. It just seems to be, there's more turnovers, mistakes, and a lot of it is just you give people a lot of room to make error, and it's just not as pleasing of a game to watch at 30 seconds. I think that there probably is something about 24 seconds, but how they got there was completely accidental.
Yeah, absolutely. I think 30 is particularly important for NCAA. Right? Because NCAA is not pro game. Yeah. NCAA is there to help with development, and I think that extra time allows for development in certain aspects. Obviously, the transition is kind of rough, right? You spend years in 30 seconds and you go to a 24, and that can be jarring. You see a lot of rookies struggle with the pace of the game. But I think 30 works for the NCAA, and I think it allows for interesting strategies that don't work with 24 seconds. Yeah, obviously they're stalling, but that sucks. But there are strategies that work with 30.
Well, especially when you look at some of the teams that are in more Power 5, the bigger conferences, bigger programs, where they implement a little bit more complicated strategy that probably wouldn't work so well in the NBA. I'm trying to think obviously your big blue bloods, they play a pro style of basketball, so they're not using 30 seconds. But thinking through some of the conferences that I watch, in the Big Ten especially, you watch a lot more ball movement. You see a lot more just intricate plays that are set up in the Big Ten versus, I don't know. I don't find myself watching the Western Athletic Conference or anything too much. But when you do, you see a little bit slower of a pace of play that is more that development you're talking about. It's interesting how on both ends of the spectrum people gain that 30 seconds. And I think that I'm sure you'd have teams like that really press the entirety of the shot clock in the NBA if you had 30 seconds. But I think 24.
So Pete Carell, again, in Pete Carell's book, he talks about it a different way. He talks a lot about how he was the coach of Princeton, right? And he was like, I'm not going to get any of the big like basketball star guys to come here. I'm getting guys to come here who want to get a degree at a good school and want to play basketball while they're doing it, right? So there's such like a diversity of skill levels at college. I think obviously he's talking about it like a long time ago, so it's a little different. But I think in some ways this feeds into the Grinnell chapter in here too, where so Pete has a lot of, his book is really funny. Like it's these little quotes, right? And it'll just be like one paragraph that says like, if you're ahead, play slower. If you're behind, play, it'll just be something like that, something really succinct. And so his concept, if I'm remembering it correctly, was that having that 30 seconds gave you a chance, especially at the end of the game, to either slow the game down to retain the lead that you had because you were not faster, you were not stronger, you didn't have better guys, you had to out strategize the other team, right? Mm-hmm. Or if you needed to catch up, you could play faster. So again, I'm not sure that 30 seconds is like the most important part of that at all.
Yeah.
But I do think I think it's fair that with like a more diverse skill set and a more diverse, and a lower floor, say, of ability, that you have more time to make decisions and strategize, right? If you need to. Like and then like, again, I mean, we'll get to the Grinnell thing as well, but a lot of that strategy is happening without necessarily having the talent or the ability that's at the top of the heap for college recruits, right? He's just saying, I'm going to play all you guys. I'm going to play 15 people. You're going to play every night. And we're going to run the legs off the other guys, right? Which is freaking awesome in a lot of ways. I don't know what it looked like, but.
Here's a question on the shot clock. Does anybody think that the game would be better with a shorter shot clock? Like say they take it down to 20 seconds. How do you think
I don't think the game would be that much different. Mainly because how many teams actually use all 24, right? We're in an era of pace and space. Our team, the Sacramento Kings, runs everyone off the floor and goes at a blistering speed. We have the highest offensive rating in the NBA. I think a lot of teams are already pushing the pace on purpose, and if you dropped the shot clock, I don't think most teams would notice. I think where you'd see the differences in the playoffs, right? Because that's where the games are slowed down. I think during normal NBA games and whatever, teams use half the shot clock anyways. But in the playoffs where that actually does matter, I don't think it'd be. I think it'd be faster paced, but I'm not sure if it'd be better.
I'm curious, like how many possessions use the full shot clock? How many possessions? I mean, I don't know any of these answers. How many possessions reset the shot clock in the course of the possession? I
think it'd actually probably be better. You mentioned resetting the shot clock. Remember a few years ago they changed the rule where after you rebounded the ball, you'd get 13 instead of the full 24.
Yeah,
and that helped a lot. So
that's true.
I think a 22 or 20 second would probably be more watchable.
Well, and the thing is that like you think of the way that the game has evolved, especially over the past 10 or so years towards offense. Offense has skyrocketed. All the previous books that y'all have read, have all talked about the offensive explosion. Well, the shot clock, you think of it as setting the pace of play, but it's really a sixth defender. Right? It is.
Yeah.
and they talk about this later on in the book, and this is one of my, like, this has really shaped the way that I watch defense, is like, how successful are you at getting teams deep into the shot clock? Well, if you killed 4 seconds off that clock, you only have to play really solid defense. I mean, think of all the possessions, you know, near and dear to our heart. The Kings played 22 seconds of great defense, and they give up, you know, a easy bucket with, you know, 2 seconds left on the shot clock. Well, it's the one thing that, you know, roundabout way actually helps your defense out by shortening the clock. So maybe that would be a good equalizer to say, look, you can do whatever you want, but we're dropping the shot clock by 4 seconds. And I'm sure you would see a pretty steep increase of 24 or 20-second shot clock violations.
While we're on the topic of rules that impact, that give offense an advantage, I had some notes about dribbling. I think the book, I'm not a huge fan of the book, but mainly because I think that its idea that every rule progression is a positive is just wrong. And I think dribbling is the big thing that really bothered me, because now there's a lot of people who believe nowadays that the loose regulation of dribbling is the cause and culprit of a lot of the offensive problems. If players don't really have to, double dribbles are never called. I mean, dribble violations are never called. Players can hold the ball, like we mentioned Iverson. He changed the game because of how he held the ball during dribbling, and now that doesn't get called. That I think there was a Thinking Basketball video about it, but basically the problem is that players can now do illegal things that allow them to score and get into positions in ways that defenders can't really defend. And I think if we go back to more traditional dribbling regulation, that would be better for the sport. I think it skew the sport more towards defense, and I think in the modern NBA, the sport would be more watchable if we tried to balance the offensive defensive balance more. That's something I feel pretty strongly about, and that's probably my biggest gripe with the book, is that it tends to dismiss this argument that it tends to say the offense dictating the sport is just better for the sport, and I'm not sure it is.
Well, he's very partial to the Warriors, right? He's very partial to like that dynastic era of basketball, which, I mean, I'm not gonna say it's right or wrong or anything like that. I don't know. You know, I think it's fun. I like watching it.
Also, a San Francisco writer. If I remember,
Yeah.
I think he's out of San Francisco. Yeah. So it makes sense.
Yeah. I guess, like, I mean, and I guess, again, like, going to the FIBA thing, too, is it's like, I just like having less shit called. Like, do we really have to call every single thing? Like, I just would like more game flow in regular NBA games. I'm not sure, you know.
Ticky-tacky foul calls is definitely another thing. Like, if we allowed more contact in the sport, that would give defenses back an advantage. And I think most people agree that FIBA rules are more fun to watch. I think a lot of people enjoy the FIBA sport more than they do the NBA sport.
But then today I was kind of thinking too, like, maybe I also like them because the USA normally wins. You know what I mean? Like, I like watching teams win. Like,
I would, during the Olympics last time, I'd stay up to watch Boomers in Japan, and I just enjoy FIBA basketball.
So you're just a FIBA sicko, pretty much.
Yeah. I should watch some more EuroLeague, but it's hard. It's in the wrong time zones.
So let me blast through some. Okay, so here's his napkin math: games where they didn't screw around, install. Notice each team took about 60 shots, 120 shots per game. It is. Since he did it backwards like this, I think, like, what we're just talking about is, has pace remained the same, right? I mean, it's still, that's a relatively Well, wait, 120 shots per game for both teams or for one team? Has it accelerated or not? I don't know.
It definitely has, because
Yeah. Well,
you're looking at
it's definitely accelerated since the 80s, but there were time periods in the 60s where it was pretty fast too.
Yeah.
But yeah, now what we're looking at, like we measure net rating, which is more or less what a typical basketball game should be on 100 possessions per team.
Mm-hmm.
So, we've gotten 40 extra possessions in with the new pace of play.
Wow. That's pretty, intense.
Yeah, the shot clock was the most important thing to happen in basketball. Without it, it wouldn't be watchable. And
yeah.
And I think the book does a really great job in emphasizing that.
Well, and okay, so we go. So BS is my favorite. Again, another great part of the book. Just so funny, interesting, hilarious character. Simple napkin math is my jam. Love it. I feel like analytics just gets too complex sometimes, and it's like, dude, if you have to go that far, like, is it even relevant? I just think it's such an easy thing to like massively overthink.
Yeah, a lot of analytics ultimately boils down to 3 is a larger number than 2, right?
Yeah, yeah, essentially. But I don't know if he talks about it in this chapter as well, but he also talks about the Elam ending, right? So we're talking about the structure of the game and the fact that you have your opponents, but then you also have the clock, and then you have the rules that are like the other sort of impediment to winning, right? You have to function within the framework of the rules. I have a lot of. Oh, here's the ad stuff where he was talking about like.
Yeah.
Are we going to talk about the Elam ending? Because I don't get it. I don't understand.
Did you watch?
I understand the mechanics
All-Star
of
game?
it.
Did you watch the All-Star game?
No, I didn't watch that. No, I don't watch All-Star games.
That's a good example. Like, that's how it works. Is that once you hit a certain point of time, then you have a target number to hit. You have a score to hit. The first to get to that score wins.
Right. I understand the actual mechanics of it. I just don't understand how it improves stuff. How it would improve
because you don't
stuff.
call timeouts and you don't hack fouls.
Yeah. You're not hacking people to send them to the line all the time, because that's an adverse strategy with the Elam ending. It encourages you to play good defense because you want them to not score, and you want to it encourages you to take risks, right? You got to go for steals more often.
There's no. I think the thing is, there's no shot. There's no time constraint.
Yeah.
There's no
time. Yeah. There's no time. It is a completely untimed. First to this score wins, right?
So you're not trying to get the ball back, and you don't care if they miss 1 of 2 at the line and make 1 of 2 at the line. You want to get the ball back in the old way, but in the Elam way, you just want to prevent them from scoring as you want to score. That's it. Yeah. Okay.
So it's first to the target score. Yeah, it doesn't matter if it takes 10 minutes or 45 seconds.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So the few games that I've seen, so I think they used it in the bubble, right? And then they used it in one of the All-Star games.
I think they use it in every All-Star game.
All the All-Star games since 2020.
Okay, and then they also used it in Summer League, but it was like conditional. I can't remember what. I think it was like after 1 overtime or something like that.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think second New Zealand.
And it's pretty exciting. Like it's unless one of the teams is completely blown by then.
But if one of the teams is blown, it doesn't matter anyway, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So I think it's interesting. I think if it was the norm, we would have different opinions on it. But I think that having it be like a lot of people complain about the end of the game stalling, right? The last 2 minutes takes 30 minutes or whatever
Yeah.
in real time, and that does solve that problem.
Yeah.
I am a huge proponent of the ELO amending. I think that would be like right now, if you introduce the ELO amending for overtime for all of NBA, that would be like one of the best changes that I think you could make. Like I think you should do it to end every game, but I understand that's like way beyond what anybody would be willing to do. But like if you put that in overtime, like you already take a thrilling overtime session and you make it even more so, right? Like the whole concept of every single game that goes to an elam ending ends on a game-winning shot, right?
Yeah.
You instantly are infusing an already exciting game with some novelty, right? Something new, something creative. Like I really think that would be a change that I actually could see happening.
So
do
does
implement
it
something.
say wear and tear on the players? Like I go back to the 3 OT Clippers game, right?
Yeah.
That game was so thrilling. It was so fun. I'm not sure that the Kings could have won it with an Elam ending, but I also feel concerned for guys having to play like 55, 60 minutes in a game. Like that is freaking insane, right? I mean, so in that sense, I
think the ELM ending makes sense for overtimes. I feel like the only reason the Kings Clippers OT was as exciting as it was because of history, right? Because of the novelty of it, the fact that we're closing in on the highest scoring game in NBA history, and obviously the game was great, but I mean, that's going to be my favorite Kings memory for decades. But like I think in most scenarios, a 3OT is not something you're rooting for. I was rooting for it in that game, but I think in a normal scenario, an ELM ending would be a better result in an overtime. I'd agree.
Yeah, I do remember. I mean, that game was so fun, but I remember being like, oh my god, like I hope De'Aaron can play after this. Like he looked so dead. Like I could tell that he had no lift left at all at the end of that game. And thankfully Malik made it happen, right? Malik made almost everything happen in those last 2 OTs. I'm sorry. De'Aaron made it happen. De'Aaron facilitated everything, but Malik made all the shots, right?
I was just looking it up, but to your point about like player safety and fatigue and all of that, I thought I remembered it this week, but that was the second game of a back-to-back.
Yeah.
And they're playing 3 overtimes on the second. I mean, think of the scenario where they play 2 back-to-back overtime or double overtime games, and actually that game was in the midst of 3 games in 4 nights. Yeah. So, and given that they were playing the Clippers, a team notorious for load management, it does. I think I really could see them, moving towards that, especially I don't know if they talked about it during this collective bargaining agreement, but I could see in a future one where, if load management comes to a head and you really start seeing a lot of people, have real big negative reactions towards load management, I could see that as a concession that they make to say, look, we will make some sort of minutes requirement, but overtime is a finite amount of time. Either you set it to 5 minutes and you work out a way to get ties in there, which I think you would have people who hate that. I would hate that. Or this is the alternative. You have a winner, 10 points, 12 points, 7 points, whatever it is. Add that number to the score at the start of OT, and next one to hit it wins.
Yeah, exactly. So, John, just let's see. It doesn't tell me what page I'm on here, does it? But this was like the best like the most concise explanation that I have found. Oh, page 56 in Kindle, with this why 7 points. If we're going to cut out 4 minutes, blah blah blah. So
Yeah, I think it'd be 12 points if I did the math right, for overtime.
yeah, that sounds about right. Well, and
Yeah.
it's depending on what the ending score is too, right?
We'll just add no. You could set the score to 0-0, and say get to 12.
Oh, that's true. Yeah,
Because they're tied. They tied up. So it doesn't
yeah.
Yeah.
So this is interesting. All this stuff about time manipulation and actually manipulating the game being this 2-part thing is interesting, and I think we've talked about it in the in terms of like clutch time too. Like in thinking basketball, he's like, oh, it doesn't matter. You could just win the game in the first quarter. You don't have to win it in the fourth quarter. Okay, but you're not going to run out of time in the first quarter, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think
always come back.
Yeah. So the Elam ending is just adding a different wrinkle in that you've got to be the first to get to the target score rather than beat the clock as well, right?
I will say that it has made the All-Star game significantly more watchable. Like I actually watched the All-Star game, and I kind of tune out till the fourth quarter, and then I watch because they actually tried. They actually did.
It's the only interesting part of the All-Star game.
It really is, right? Like, and that's proof positive for this working.
Because I thought that the main objective was to get rid of the fouling, the intentional fouling, but they never did that in the All-Star game. I'm pretty sure. So, but it just makes it better overall.
Well, they don't even play defense in the All-Star game anyway.
Yeah.
So I think it's I'm not sure if it's an exact translation of how it would work on the NBA floor, but I agree. I think
part of it is that there's a target number, right? This is the moment you have to care about, right? So that's why it matters in the All-Star game is that these players who are lackadaisical and don't really care are like, oh shit, now we can win the game. Let's go and actually do something.
Is anybody a sicko and an ardent follower of the Big Three? I don't watch the Big Three.
No,
but I think they use, if I'm not mistaken, doesn't he say that the Big Three uses?
Yeah, then they use it. I think I watched it right when it came out, and then no.
I don't know if I want to see 43-year-old Jamal Crawford play.
Okay.
Steroids, so Mike Bibby.
He goes into all this stuff about the rules changing, especially around big men, right? George Mikan. And I again, this was probably in most of the other books we've read, especially the George Mikan stuff. I mean, the best part of this chapter for me was the stuff about the ABL and then Saperstein, who was like the manager for the Harlem Globetrotters, and how he was the one that really pushed this 3-point line kind of idea. And not only did he push it, but he had this, upper hand in that he could control the schedules of the ABA teams. So he had a lot of and I don't know if this is where he talks about Wilt's biography. That was also interesting. I'd be interested in reading Wilt's biography at some point.
That would be interesting. I mean,
it sounds like it's kind of half exaggeration and and then we already, from Loose Balls, I think we knew like a lot of this. This part, the honor goes to Howard Hobson, who was head coach of the Oregon Ducks team that won the first ever NCAA tournament in 1939. Hobson left Oregon shortly after that triumph to get his doctorate at Columbia, and his thesis was a broad analysis on basketball that he later turned into a book. The Long Field Goal, he wrote in chapter 10, is the most spectacular play in basketball. To encourage more exciting action from downtown and a more open game, Hobson proposed awarding players an additional point for the baskets made from 21 feet out or further. So we know, I mean, I think college is 22 feet, and then NBA is like 23.9 or something like that. But I've never seen Howard Hobson get credited with like the invention of this concept of like a 3-point shot. So I thought that was cool. And then that so many people were like, thought it would suck. And I mean, people just don't like change, right? So it's even if you change the entire boat, it's hard to change each piece. Because there's always going to be detractors and people who think it's not going to work. Like I think there's so much conversation. Like I don't go on Twitter anymore, but I have my notifications for like 3 people still. And De'Aaron Fox had put that thing out today that was like talking about, are you into the play-in not the play-in tournament, the in-season tournament,
Yeah.
And so I kind of I can't handle Twitter at all. Like I have a really low tolerance for it, but I went onto his thread and just read through some of those, and those are really good. But a lot of people are just like, I don't know what they're reacting to. Like, no, we haven't played one yet. So how the hell do you know? Like, we don't know anything yet. It might be really fun. It might really suck. But until we actually see it, like, I don't totally know how you can have like an opinion on it,
I mean, you have an opinion on the concept, right?
Oh, totally.
You made your opinion on. Some people make their opinion and nothing can change it, right? But yeah, we'll see. Yeah, I think it'll just make meaningless games a little more exciting, and that's about it.
And realistically, all they did is they made one game TBD, right? If by forming these, you're already playing those games anyways. You're just assigning arbitrary meaning to them now.
Yeah. And one extra game with like bragging rights attached. I mean, and a little bit of money. I mean, I would think that like for the guys at the very end of the roster, like that money might make a little bit of a difference, But for the stars,
trip to Vegas.
Yeah.
And people like winning things, like look at the joy in the players' faces when they win summer league championships, right?
Right.
Like, now it's an in-league turn. Like that's,
it's just fun.
It's fun.
I mean, I think it makes the kind of the dregs of the season a little bit more exciting because you can kind of have something else to track, right? And then it also adds in the excitement of like the college dynamic of like it's one game, I mean, I guess there is like some kind of seeding and all that kind of stuff that you can be obsessed about, but it's one and done. It's not like a big long tournament where you're like,
This is selfish for me, but I hope that the in-game tournament leads to more national games for us. These are random games that are important for everyone, and that means maybe all of these will be nationally televised if they're all important. And I'm hoping, instead of 1 or 2 games, we'll get a dozen or something.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's probably true. If somebody really shows out or is really fun, or I'm so curious. Like I really am interested to see if the Kings get more games than Oklahoma, because people are so excited about Oklahoma.
I don't understand how SGA is now somehow a top 10 player for some people. I know he's good.
He's great, yeah.
But I did not understand everyone's excitement to that extent.
Like I think, there's a lot of. I mean, and maybe they'll be really good. Like they were good. They were super fun to watch last year for sure. Absolutely. I'm not like I'm not, but I just like feel like the podcast kind of hype has been really, really positive.
They still don't have a real big man, and I think that'll still keep them from being great. I mean, yeah.
Well, see what chat looks like in there, and
we should find out this week on TV games, right?
I think so. Yeah.
This week, I believe. Thought I read that somewhere.
Okay, so Abe Saperstein, NBL, APA stuff. We talk a little bit about the Globetrotters. talk about some of like the race diversity stuff as far as like the Globetrotters in some ways being more fun and being a better home for blocks, parallel tracks. Again, like to me, like breaks of the game, we've done all this. Like I feel like I have a very intimate knowledge of how unfair segregation was, and how hard it was for guys to break in. And he talks about a game with the Globetrotters versus a real NBA team, which the Globetrotters won. And then when they changed the line and pulled the line in 1994.
Yeah, Jordan made 3-pointers that season.
Yeah. So it's just so interesting. So he seems to tie the escalation of 3-pointers to that brief time that they pulled the 3-point line in, right? I don't know. I mean, he like creates a pretty like seems to say that's why guys started practicing it more, is because they could make more of them.
Aren't there a lot of people saying that though? I don't think that's other places too.
Yeah, well, 94 is probably. I have seen it as other factors as well, I guess you would say. Like ruling out hand checking encouraged it. The 3-second rule, which I think he does also mention in here.
And then obviously a new generation growing up with the 3-point shot. Yeah.
Well, and I mean, like so all the George Mike and Wilt Chamberlain, Shaq stuff, like watching Shaq growing up, all the rules got changed around Shaq. Like that's what the 3-second rule was, right? He can't stand in the lane and you just feed him, because it would just be unfair. But so decentralizing the power of the center also contributed to like having that outside shot, be more important. So yeah, it happened in 2 ways, gradually and then suddenly. Such a great line. And then he talks about, he goes into the Kirk Goldsberry stuff, which I thought was also really great, that he talks about how Goldsberry was a geographer and was a cartographer. And so that's what helped him, make these fantastic maps. And in Sprawl Ball, like all of the visualizations of the shot charts and the heat maps and all that stuff are really great. Also talks about how Dean Oliver was also somebody who, in his like normal civilian life, created heat maps, but then was able to like translate it to like apply to the NBA.
Yeah, as the husband of a geographer and geoscientist, this chapter spoke to me. And then like some of the data that they gathered and creating these heat maps, it was just really fascinating. Like, I don't know, I'm kind of an analytical, nerdy, engineering type person, but like seeing this intersection of, hey, let's look at like not thinking of basketball in terms of the kinesthetics of how do I improve at being, stronger, faster, more talented at the game, but how do we get smarter at the game? Like that whole analytics thing. I think that this was an interesting perspective on it, looking at it from the perspective of a geographer, not from a basketball player.
So, the book before last, we reread Jerry's book last time, but the time before that, we read this book, Spatial Analytics, it was a bit of a dry read, it wasn't like but it's just about the introduction of Sport View, which is like the camera apparatus that they use to spatially track each event in a basketball game. And had access to it in 2011, but he talks about how that was introduced formally, like going live with games and stats and stuff in 2013. And I found that to be a really interesting read too. And I thought it was an interesting kind of groundwork for understanding this a little bit better. And then again, Goldsberry's book is really great, visually stunning, I would say. And this whole kind of concept of like efficiency, I think, is like the main buzzword analytically right now, right? And then what's the other concept? There's one other concept, but now it's escaped me. That's the PPP, right? I mean, all of these, you go through like all of these. Like, what is the aggregate value of a layup? What's the aggregate value of, a three-pointer? What's the aggregate value of a possession, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So those all go to like becoming more efficient, taking good, like the Patrick Ewing GIF. Did you practice that shot? But yeah. So, but then it can go overboard too, right? I mean, you can become the Houston Rockets, and overuse it or over rely on it, I guess.
Well, even in the book when they were talking about the system, which I believe is in this chapter, like that is analytics or became analytics to kind of an unhealthy extent, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Except it probably by Oliver and by Vivek when they hired his son, David Arsenal, I've heard you say his name, Arsenal Jr., his son, to be the coach of the Bighorns. For Senior, it was just a way to have fun with his staff with the kids that he had. It was a way for them to enjoy themselves playing basketball in college.
Well, and I mean, is that I think like again, like he had the leeway to do that because he was sort of like the Princeton of Pete Carell. Like those guys didn't come there to become basketball stars. They came to go to school to play basketball. So it's like such a different dynamic. However, because of that, it kind of started like snowballing into this like thing in the NBA where they're like, well, wait a minute, they've like uncovered some kind of, tricks here that make a lot of sense that like we should be adopting or we should be testing or, which that's what they should do, right? I mean, it kind of makes you wonder how many like mistakes or just like things that were like dumb luck that like people didn't take further. You know what I mean? That would have been really cool too. So the magnitude that they subsidize the three-point shot, that subsidy creates such a major incentive from an efficiency standpoint to shoot more threes than two. So again, we're just going right back to 1962 and Pete Carell, and three's worth more than two.
I have a question. I'm not sure if the answer might be no, but do you think there's anything that, based on the three-pointer taking 40 years to become maximally utilized and it being pretty obvious really in retrospect that three is better than two, like is there anything not similar at all, it doesn't have to be at all similar, but in basketball that teams might be able to find and say like, hey, maybe we should do this and it'll really help us win? Can you think of anything, or is it just like can't think of anything like
mid-range shot?
Yeah, I think that you're
okay. Yeah, there you go. Okay,
the game invert back in on itself because, like, especially like I think of this like especially when it comes to De'Aaron Fox and his mid-range game, like you see that defenses are starting to adapt to that sprawl ball. Like they're guarding five out. They've got an umbrella coverage on the 3-point line, and they're leaving the hardest shot, or what used to be the hardest shot because players were forming their defense in these areas. The mid-range is now completely unguarded. So I think you'll start seeing people revert back to the mid-range to say, look, the 3-point, like that shot is just not there anymore. Like they're guarding it tougher. I think that you're going to start seeing rules start to creep back in towards regulating the 3-point shot going out of control. I think the mid-range. I think that you're going to start seeing a resurgence of the mid-range in the next.
All the best players are growing to a mid-range shot.
Yeah.
You'll see, and there's a whole team, the Phoenix Suns, that have made an existence out of the mid-range shot because it's not defended, right? Like the easiest shot is an open shot. Like even in the 3-point era, the most valuable shot is not a 3. The most valuable shot is right next to the basket because it's the easiest shot. There will always be a chase to the easiest shot. I think in the future we'll see the mid-range grow a little bit more in prominence. Obviously, it won't be a revolution. It probably won't be as big as the change in the 3-point shot, but we'll see a more wide usage of the basketball court.
Yeah.
I think full court press might be interesting too. We tend to only think of the sport half court. If defenses try to get an advantage by pressing more full court, that'd be another interesting change.
Yeah.
I noticed. So, I am a fan of the Missouri Tigers. That's where I went to school. And their new coach started putting in where their guys after made buckets would press full court. And it completely changed how teams had to game plan against them. And even though they weren't as talented in the SEC as some of the bigger schools, they had success. And so, I think that you're going to see a lot more teams start to go with that full court and really utilize all of that defensive space and kill a lot of that shot clock. Right? You're using that shot clock as the extra defender by, instead of giving them a free dribble down the court to start the shot clock at 20 seconds, you're making them work, and now they have to start it at 16.
Yeah, I think for me, that's what I hope is the next frontier. Is I hope defense starts catching up with the offense, and to me, it is I think most basketball, whatever, people who don't play basketball, who don't really, who are just talking about it on a podcast or whatever, like us, tend to think of defense as single event kind of occurrence. And then when I actually listen to Davion, when I listen to Tyrese, when I listen to players who play, De'Aaron even, I could see it with Steph in the games that Davion played defense against Steph in the playoffs. I could see that Steph was having to work so much harder over the course of the game that by that fourth quarter clutch time, he no longer had the same lift that he did at the beginning of the game. I know that's totally normal, and a great player like him can sometimes overcome that. But I just think that defense is a cumulative, event over the course of the entire game and not just a single event occurrence. So to me, I hope that we see more players like Davion who are these little shit brick houses that can just get the fuck into you all game long until you don't have it anymore at the end of the game. I know that didn't totally work out because they didn't go to him in game 6 and game 7. They chose offense over that strategy. But to me, that's my favorite thing in the game right now. I think in here they talk also about the Milwaukee Bucks defense and how they love it when people are driving to the hoop because that's what they know they can stop, so I think that there's a lot of room for defense to do new things and maybe even find mistakes or surprises that work, especially switching has been happening now for a long time, right? So it's not a new thing, but I think there might be new elements of switching that sort of happen. Okay, so 8:26, we have shit ton of book left. Are you guys cool to go for another like half hour at least?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So let me see how I've sort of gone ahead and talked about stuff later in the book too. But let me see. Hobson. So 3-point. Yeah. So this is the stuff about in 1994 when experimented with 3-point arc plays closer to the hoop. So that was only for 2 years. And they moved it back out. But this realization accelerated young players' training in the long distance arts. So,
So my big thought on the 3-pointer that came from this is the idea of, do you think that the game would be better if they did move the 3-pointer back a couple of feet?
No.
Like, I think that. Do you think that they would ever consider doing it?
No.
so yeah.
Do you like I guess the real question with the 3-point shot is, do you prefer the big man domination, or do you prefer the guards being the lead players in the league?
I personally like mid-range and post play. That's the game that I grew up with. That's the game that I really loved watching. Like I don't want to get rid of the threes. A 3-pointer is, second most exciting thing in basketball behind, as he talks about later, the slam dunk, right? I don't want to get rid of it, but to their point here, statistically, the 3-pointer is grotesquely overvalued, right? It is too much of a premium to put on a shot that now is made whatever they said, like on average 5 or 6% less than the average 2-point shot. So I would be in support of moving it back maybe a foot or so.
So in Kirk Goldsberry's book, at the end of his book, he has all these different scenarios that he comes up with. Like, it could be different from court to court to court, right? So like everybody's court would be different. They could just like Jerry Reynolds, his thing is just take away the corners, right? Just make it a full arc instead of evening it out at the corners so that you have like no space to shoot in the corners. But I mean, mine, I guess, would be if I had to just be in silly sports, right? And I was just allowed to do anything. I think I would change it every year. I think I would make it, pull it back, put it in, just change it every year. And leave it at 3 points, right? I mean, the other one that comes up a lot is like, should there be a 4-pointer, right? Which they do in the big 3, but it's just like a spot on the floor, like it's a dot, and you can go to the dot and shoot from the dot, and that's like a 4-pointer. I don't know. I think players will get good at it wherever it is, and I don't mind watching it. I'm not like I feel like this guy and Kirk Goldsberry too were like, oh my God, like, do we really have to watch like Boogie Cousins like hoist up 5 threes a game? Like, this is not what I came here for, right? But to me, I'm like, that sounds fucking awesome. Count me in. I'm all over it. Like
all the Rudy Gobert tweets about him playing stretch 5. I want to see it. It's gonna be crazy. It's not gonna work, but it'll be fun. I think that, I prefer a more open game. I prefer the not Shaq dunking on everyone every other game possession, right?
I mean, there's always going to be like those savants too. Like, you think about like Damian Lillard's range, right? Or Steph Curry's range. It doesn't matter where the 3-point line is. They shoot from 27 feet. They shoot from 29 feet. Like, Damian Lillard shoots, I mean, he regularly shoots from way above the arc. Like, so I think there'll still be people who are absolutely fantastic at it no matter where you put it, and then there's always going to be people who struggle with it. I don't know about that one. I'm not as sold on that as I am on like the Elam ending, for instance.
Yeah, Yeah.
And maybe it just needs more testing for me to be sold on it too. Maybe like if they do it in summer league and they try different things in these other kind of venues that are a little bit less meaningful, maybe I'd be up for watching something different for sure. You know. Okay, the Grinnell stuff is here. So the thing I loved about the Grinnell stuff is, first of all, they had this formula that was like, if you do this, this, and this, you're going to have a 97% chance of winning, which is totally I would be like, yes, I love stuff like that. Like another napkin math solution, you know what I mean? And then he plays all 15 guys. I love that too.
I love that. I would love to see a team. I mean, we had something similar when Jaeger was here, where we just run up and down the court and try to exhaust the other team, right?
Yeah.
I think if teams use all 15 guys, it's a net benefit. And I also think that the problem with the Houston Rockets was not the threes. I think the problem with the Houston Rockets was James Harden and his ISOs. That's what made that team unwatchable, I think. But I think teams chucking threes can be fun.
Yeah. Yeah. For sure. I agree with you. I think James Harden gets a lot of shit. For me, what I dislike about him most is that he gives up when he's unhappy.
Mm-hmm.
And he just doesn't play. But showing a player their own efficiency sheet and them completely conforming to it is kind of mind-boggling in a way that he was able to do that, you know? I don't know.
He's a gamer, you know, as far as like, he's a guy that wants to know the rules every offseason.
Yeah.
The rule changes. It's like, okay, how can I manipulate the changes to my benefit? It's kind of like that's what he's like, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah. He plays on the fringes of the rules always.
Yeah.
I think that's part of what fuels a lot of the hate, because a lot of watching James Harden is either he's not playing the game the right way or he's cheating, right?
Yes.
That's the narrative around him is, he's either not trying hard or he's cheating.
Or he's getting away with something that no one else can get away with.
Yeah.
Which sometimes it's something that no one else really can do. So I think it's a little unfair. I don't know.
Yeah.
And then the fact that Grinnell is like making 150 points a game. I also kind of dig
Delightful.
Talk about fun to watch, you know. And they just force our opponents to run up and down the court 150 times, shoot the ball 94 times, offensive rebounds 33% of our missed attempts, make our opponents turn the ball over more than 32 times. The math was sound. When we accomplished all 5 goals, we won at a 97% rate. Like, how awesome is that? Like, you have your game plan, you know? And then, so I did in my thread too, if you want to go watch it on YouTube, there's a bunch of different, like, how Grinnell runs the system, and like the platooning defense is really interesting, where they just like mob the other team's ball handler. It's just a fun, you know, weird thing that they can do because they're like a niche kind of basketball market, you know. And I love that he said, like, you know, all the other teams, like the other 2 years of teams that he had that didn't win anything, like none of those guys talk to him anymore, but all of the guys from his system years, you know, he's in contact with, and they had a great time, and it was super fun. And that is a part of it too, right? I mean, I hate to keep going back to it, but I watched the entire Tyrese podcast, and he talks about that, like how he wanted to play FIBA with Anthony Edwards because Anthony Edwards is so freaking funny that he's like, I was peeing my pants on the bench the whole time. I'm just laughing so hard. So I think it's important for the players too, right? You have to love it. I think most of them do. But I mean, I think it's important too to remember that, like, it's supposed to be about the joy of the game, right?
I think this page you have up right now has a really important thing. If it automatically gets kicked back out to the shooter for a second shot, usually if they get another chance within 2 or 3 seconds, they can make an adjustment. I think that's a pretty interesting way of. I've never thought about that.
Well, and
ever.
they make that second shot at about a 55% clip. 55% on a 3-point shot is outstanding, and post rebound again is outstanding. So, I mean, that's really interesting in the sense that I've been trying to do this rebounding project where I was trying to figure out, like, because the Kings were weak at offensive rebounding, but they still managed to win a lot of games despite that, right? I haven't come to any like hard and fast conclusions with the data that I've been looking at because I've just been digging through it to understand it better. But I mean, I think this is such a compelling argument for offensive rebounding is that 55% clip. I mean, that's well worth it, right?
Yeah, and the confidence, the mental aspect is huge too.
Yeah. And then he says, and just to feel the sense of impending doom. So that's where they like sort of break their spirit, is just raining threes. All we had to do, open up the NCAA record book, flip through the pages, stick your finger and go, let's break this record. Just a fun little story that I had not heard before.
Yeah, it was delightful.
And then that it tied into, the Reno Bighorns, and which I actually remember this team for those couple of years. And then it ties also into like Dean Oliver's tenure with the Kings. And it talks a little bit about, with Zach and Annalise Greer, they wanted to bring David on to experiment. Oliver, like Morey, is one of the NBA's most prominent number crunchers, saw something about the system in 2014. So the cartographer is keen to mention that Oliver has a PhD in environmental engineering. So he has a real spatial element to his thinking as well. That's just fun, interesting, cool kind of applications. And it's so interesting that like so many civilian, which is really where the analytics movement started, is in the civilian sector. It's just like people who had other, proficiencies in evaluating data were like, oh, I also like basketball and I can apply it,
Yeah. I wonder how diverse front offices are nowadays in regards to that. Like, our GM, McNair has a CS degree, computer science degree, right?
Yes.
I wonder how much variety there is in regards to backgrounds in front offices because of stuff like this. I hope it's more
the one thing that I know that they have this year on the coaching bench is they have Robbie Lemons, who is, his job is essentially to interpret and communicate the value of the analytics in real time to the team. So he's talking to the coaches and the players to show them what is most efficient happening in the game at that point. And that's totally common on NBA benches now. Most coaching staffs have that, like, analytics coach, if you will. So that's more of like a bottom up kind of thing, I think, like where you're talking to individuals about what they can improve on in that game. But then, I think most offices are bigger than they used to be for sure. And I again, like at the time that we read that spatial analysis book, I wasn't super high on it, but I find myself that I keep going back to it and kind of looking at it again and referencing it, because I thought he did a good job of talking about like Dork Elvis and, how the movement kind of expanded out and stuff like that. Okay, let me see if I can blast through any of these, like big men I think this might be where he starts sort of talking about free
I
throw.
have to say, listening in the audiobook, hearing them list the things not talked about is hilarious.
I just lost. I audibly was laughing through my neighborhood, going on walks, listening to the audiobooks on all the things not. And then I had to think through when he talks about the things that are discovered or that are discussed, and I was like, oh, did they really talk about it? As a matter of fact, they did. Reminder of how off the walls this book is.
So okay, now this is the chapter where I think I started like highlighting less and taking a little like less, intense notations and stuff like that. And the free throw stuff he's talking about, it's way easier to be great at free throws if you're not a basketball player, right? If you're just practicing free throws.
I love the free throw chapter. I thought this was my favorite in the book. I think it's crazy that regardless of who's playing or like what league, the average free throw shot is always like 75. I think that's interesting. And I did know about how hard it is to get above a 90%. That I was aware of, but that's still crazy. I think there's a lot of insights in this chapter.
Well, it's really interesting that he was saying that like the female NCAA teams shoot almost the same as male too, and I don't know if he said for WNBA. I do really like that he included the women in a lot of places in this book, even though I haven't highlighted it. But I found that to be just the fact that women were such an integral part of the game development and innovation. Even though they're sort of invisible, even though I even sort of made them even more invisible by not highlighting it, but it's fascinating that they sort of feed into all of that. So he talks all about the guy who like does all the practicing his own shot. Here's where the next variable they studied was height, arc, all of that kind of stuff.
The talk about the granny shot was fun too.
Yes.
Yeah.
That was really good. And like they didn't want to do it just because they looked silly.
Well, and I thought one of the more interesting insights from this chapter was talking about how the players who have a higher launch point had an easier time with free throws. So theoretically, taller players should be better at free throws, yet like when you look at it, I mean, some of the historically worst free throw shooters have been centers and big.
Yeah.
Right? Like, I mean, he talks about Shaq and all that, and so I found that fascinating. And then like the whole talk about how Shaq made like 80% of his free throws in practice, and like even was it on it's escaping Drummond, yeah. Drummond was making like 70 or so % in practice, and then you get him into the game and they completely lock up.
Yeah, it's all mental.
Yeah.
And then the fact that go ahead.
Oh, Tyrese too. Again, like I can't stop. I like this thing was like 2.5 hours long. I invested all this time in it. But he talks about how when you're shooting in a gym, like your depth perception is totally different because you're shooting the basket and there's like a wall behind it, right? But then in a game, even on a practice court, you're usually like enclosed, right? But then when you get into a game, not only is there the crowd and there's the nerves and all that stuff,
you know how
people behind the basket who are like yelling and waving noodles and whatever they're doing. And he was like, it's totally different. Like your depth perception gets jacked because you have to like train yourself to be totally focused on the basket and not see any of the other stuff behind it and pretend like there's still a wall there, which again, I
wonder if that's going to change in the future. You know how they have these giant TV screens at these practice facilities, if during behind the basket, if they throw like a video feed of a tough crowd, I think that I wonder how that'd change.
like simulating more game experience, because
Mhm.
like like that is the big variable, right? Like that's the difference between shooting 80-90% in practice and shooting 70-60% in a game, is that environment you just are not recreating.
Yeah.
Really slim and immersive VR equipment could
Well,
help.
they even mentioned that Drummond wore
didn't help.
like a big VR and it didn't help.
Okay.
You,
Well, I don't
you'd
really
think
care
it
about
would,
free throws
right?
that much because
I would have, yeah, I would have
practical.
thought, but I think there's another thing. Like it was in a book that I was reading on Descent for Business, but something about like they were talking about devil's advocates and how they're not effective, and how when you know that something is not real, you treat it very differently. And so, like VR, you know it's not real. Like you don't. It's not the same feeling. Like it can trick you for a second, but when you remember, oh yeah, this is fake, all the benefit goes out the window.
Yeah, VR.
What about horror movies then? What about horror movies? Did they mention horror movies when you're reading that part or studying that part? Because like that scares
I don't
people.
watch horror movies.
I know, but they scare people. Is what I'm saying.
No,
you know they're not
right.
real.
You're right. And but yeah, I mean, I think that's an interesting thought. I wonder how it would change.
I think it's VR when trying to simulate reality is not very convincing. I don't know if you've used VR much. It's a lot better for creating unique experiences, right?
Okay.
Well,
yeah,
I feel like
so it's not amazing in simulation. You can see the depth issues. It's totally different.
Well, and it's
VR is like consciously trying to change your worldview, and horror movies are subconsciously trying to change it, right? Like they're trying to get at fears that you have that are ingrained, whereas like VR or something, you're just trying to change like the perception of what is happening in the moment, you know. To me, that's two totally different things. Like,
yeah, that's a good point.
Okay, so Elena Deladonna, women are better at free throws, but it talks a lot about like muscle memory, consistency, practice, right?
I thought the part where they talked about the WNBA, the hoop being the ball being different, not having any impact because of the way the ball bounces on the hoop, was really interesting.
I like that he discusses this before he talks about like in I think next chapter, the chapter after, he talks about the different forms that clay and stuff have. And I think that's interesting that he talks about her form here, that she has this extremely repeatable form, right? Where it's just decisive, smooth, brisk motion. And I think for me, like watching most shooters, I could say probably like Slow-Mo and Tyrese are the exceptions to this.
Yeah, Tyrese's shot is wild. It's like, it's the ugliest, weirdest shot in the world, but it goes in.
Yeah. And but I would say that like having this so I pulled a bunch of clips of like Clay's form and Sasha's form, right? And they both have this very repeatable form, like whereas Steph is more of like the guy who can like find his form from any situation. So like Keegan is more Steph like in that, I mean, he was mostly a catch and shoot shooter, right? But he can recover and snap into form easier than like a Sasha can. Sasha's more like, I pulled Luke Kennard because Luke Kennard was best 3-point shooter in the league last year. Luke Kennard has this just repeatable form, same form every single time. Takes him almost no time to get into it. He has no dip, shoots really high. And Sasha looks really similar to him. Luke Kennard has clay form, right? So he doesn't have good recovery, but he has good form if he has the like second to get there. Anyways, okay, and then Andre Drummond stuff. Poor Andre Drummond. It's a little made fun of here. But it's like Shaq too. It's like Shaq, Shaq's entire career, it's like, dude, you can make those shots like with your eyes closed, like as long as you aren't standing at the free throw line trying to make them, So it's just
It was
the
just
pressure.
One thing about the thing was, you know how it's all mental, right? When they change their form, it gets a lot better, just because they're doing something different. Have you guys watched Sochan on?
Yeah. Wait, doesn't he have a one-handed? He shoots it one-handed, right?
Oh,
Oh,
Do we lose someone?
yeah, we lost.
Oh,
Maybe he's not on the stage. He still see there's still 5 people in the room, so he went to spectating. He'll be back in a second, I'm sure.
oh, his connection probably got bad for a second.
Yeah.
I mean, so it talks about like the granny method, the underhand method, and I think he was talking about Jeremy Sochan
Yeah,
shoots it with one hand. But it doesn't matter, right? It's if you can repeat it and if you can do it almost every time. And if you're not scared to look like a dweeb, well, like Wilt Chamberlain was. um,
Shaq, I'm too cool for that.
I'd rather shoot 0% than shoot underhand. I'm too cool.
which is such a Wilt thing to say.
I know, right? That's funny. But Shaq was like, it was so egregious because there was the hack-a-Shaq at the time, too. So, like, teams would just, and then once Pop started the hack-a-Shaq, it was like everybody did the hack-a-Shaq, and it was just, that was how you were going to spend the very end of the game. I was a Lakers fan at the time, sadly, but, and you just knew at the end of every close game, it was going to be this freaking hack-a-Shaq thing. And Shaq always said, I made them when they mattered. I make them if they matter. That wasn't always true. And it was frustrating. Okay, so I feel like I don't want to like have this be a 3-hour long recording. But we're only 41% through the book too. Like, superlative foul shooters, the ones who set implausible records and break impossible streaks, don't tend to be professional basketball players. The pros need to focus on all facets of the game, and free throws are often an afterthought.
which is weird, given how important the foul shot is for superstars and stuff. Like Harrison Barnes is making a living off his free throws, and there's so many of superstars also make a living off of the free throws. You'd think it'd be more of an emphasized thing.
Well, especially in a league looking at efficiency, like the points per possession, the expected points on a free throw, on a set of free throws is the same as a layup, right? Like you're at 1.4 points per possession.
I think free throws theoretically is slightly higher, actually.
Yeah. So you would think that people would emphasize shooting free throws above all else. Like you look at the extent at which they're practicing 3-pointers, you would think that free throws would be.
And especially, how like a lot of college scouts use the free throw shot, not the 3-point shot, as an estimate on how good a shooter is.
Because it's all about repetition of your form.
Yeah.
If you have a repeatable free throw, they think, okay, well, you have it in you to have a good repeatable shot.
So it's kinesthetics, how the body leans to develop a repeatable motion. Motion can produce the arc speed. So also most teams, from the Davion Mitchell-Dusenmo interview, he talked about NOAA basketball technology, which Jake Fisher also talks about in Built to Lose, which I didn't know that the Sacramento Kings use, but I guess like 25 or 26 of the teams in the league use it. And it's basically, it measures all that stuff for you. So like if you take the shot, you can go look at it and it'll be like, oh, you had this much arc, here's where you let go. So you can actually look at the visualization of the shot you took in order to correct it and find proper form. And then once you found it, that's when you would
I feel like
obviously.
Davion should talk to this guy back in the Midwest, and like collaborate with him for a couple weeks.
Well,
And
so he's working with Brandon Payne, I think his name is, who's Steph's shooting coach.
I'm just saying, Davion's kind of seems
Coach.
very, very dedicated to trying to become better, and like he wouldn't care about who he's talking to. If he could talk to,
No,
you know.
that's true. I wonder if many like actual, NBA players go and seek out like free throw specialists, or I guess you could say like lethal shooter and stuff is one of those kind of like gimmick type shooting coaches, who wasn't in the league, or I don't know what is.
I mean, the off season's pretty short, and that's the only time they get to work on their game. So
Yeah.
I'd assume a lot of players don't.
I thought this was funny. They talked a lot. I can't find it right now, but they talked about how Benny the Bull would do the pre Benny the Bull, whoever that was, would do this slam dunk like thing in doubles. Antics loosened the rim at one end of the court so severely that a maintenance crew had to come in and tighten its mechanism before game one against the Jazz. And thank God, because both those free throws were right there. They tightened them up just right.
And
so
I remember listening to this and thinking, this is such a Steve Kerr story. It's it's complete horseshit. And you know that Steve Kerr knows that it's horseshit. And he's having so much fun with it.
But there's all this mythology built around these moments of these games, Karl Malone had made more free throw shots than anybody else in NBA history, but he's remembered for the 2 misses, right? So it's like these things become their own mythologies, and I appreciate those kind of surrounding kind of bullshit, stories around them.
I love this
one. The guy, let's see, jumping past conclusions. This one's about the jump shot, right?
You would have thought that the jump shot would have been a thing, right? Because of the kinesthetics of motion. The fact that it wasn't a thing for so long is baffling.
Well, he almost makes it seem like the first slam dunk predates the first jump shot. Because if the first slam dunk was done because somebody grabbed onto the side of the cage that was around the court, that was certainly predates everything that he came up with here. That was, the inception of the jump shot, including the movie that he tracks it to, which, I mean, this one, it was great. It was fun. The Luisetti stuff, the flamboyant jump shooters, and these kind of like guys who were, it was like seen as like a trick shot, and I mean, that stuff was really fun. Some of this chapter I thought went a little off the rails. But
I really enjoy the journalists trying to find the secret story. One of my favorite YouTubers is John Boys. One of my favorite videos of his is how the NCAA has the wrong score count for the highest scoring game.
Oh, yeah.
And it's stuff like that. It's silly, but it's so fun.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's a fine line, right? Between what's fun about like these sort of mythologies that could be half bullshit and what's the truth. And I mean, it's a part of the allure of the game, I think.
Well, it's the hunt for basketball Bigfoot. It's that mythology. Yes. It's that like, we're uncovering some hidden knowledge, and I heard this from this person. It's not like nowadays when you can go and watch a clip of it or something like that. It really is like a good oral tradition where it's I heard this from this person, and it was written in the newspaper this way. It's I found that really fascinating.
Oops. So there's the Joan Crawford little, that we had talked about earlier, that she was, oops. No, I don't know what I did. But then she just said, "Hey, that's so much more fun to watch. That's going to be the future." I thought that was funny and cool. Attractive game for fans. And then he traces the jump shot to this, the Fair Co-Ed movie, which was like William Randolph Hearst and starred as Mistress Marion Davies as a college student who joins the school's basketball team. And in this movie, does it have the date of the movie anywhere?
I found this hilarious because I did the Highway 1 drive recently, so I went to the Hearst Castle. And,
oh yeah,
yeah, and then seeing it come up again so soon was hilarious to me.
1937. So it's not totally unrecognizable. These two sites, same player regains possession, drains an airborne one-handed shot, a move that predates Hank Luisetti's headline-making runners against LIU by 9 years. So could it be that the first jump shots in history have been hiding inside a pre-war rom-com? This is just so fun.
Yeah.
And that it was a female, and and he goes into who she was. Let me see her. And then I left, but even while they were flambeing the league to the tune of 67 wins during 14-15, old-timers, jump shooting teams don't win championships. That refrain was repeated right up until the moment when Golden State celebrated its first of 3 NBA titles and shut them up for good. Like, I feel like that's a lot of, the, like, defense wins championships. Like, not really. Like, and, for a couple teams, it did.
Yeah, there's a lot of ways to make a winning team.
Yeah, winning championships wins championships. However,
yeah. Exactly. And then this is the Thompson and Curry form stuff.
Yeah. I think it's generally accepted that Thompson is the ideal shooting form. A lot of shooting coaches.
Yeah, although it's been a couple years since he has led the league.
Yeah. But he's been hurt
since the injuries. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. I mean, I'm not saying he's not the ideal shooting form, and his podcast was also really good, and that I put in the thread if you missed it. But he talks about this in that podcast specifically. He talks about what Steph can do that he cannot do, and it's really interesting. And it's just like a little blurb. He talks a lot. He just is like so complimentary to Steph, and acknowledges that Steph has probably carried him and is a fantastic teammate and all that kind of stuff. So that's I kind of like hate Draymond, and I love to hate Steph, but I love Clay, personality wise. So I really enjoyed his little. And I think this is where he's talking about the ballet stuff, which, like, yeah, it's cool. It's the beauty of the human form. Again, I'm not sure.
A lot of these tangents lost me.
Yeah, it's like the noodle making and stuff like that. It's like, yeah, that's cool. I don't know, like.
When they got to the passing, the therapist, the counsel, the couples therapist, that one fucking lost me. I thought that was the most ridiculous thing. But I get it. There is some insight there, but it's not genuine insight about the sport of basketball. And that was probably my gripe, is that a lot of these tangents didn't lead to actual insight. I was hoping a book called How to Watch Basketball Like a Genius would have more insight, but that might just be me putting like.
And it is. I mean, I guess it's right there in the title, right? It's how to watch basketball. He's not trying to tell anybody how to play it or how to be better or anything like that. It's how to enjoy basketball even more as a spectator.
Well,
Hmm.
and
Yeah.
I think his writing style, like I don't know if anybody's a fan of Chuck Klosterman, but he's got a similar style of like pop culture, making references and like complete analogies that are not maybe one for one, but are entertaining in the least. And that's I think what I found.
Yeah, yeah.
So even like it is an interest. He does have a couple that are really really good perspectives, but to your point, Kevin, some of them kind of go real off the rails.
He goes into a lot of, he gets very warrior-y in this chapter for my taste. Like, I enjoyed the shooting form stuff. Talks about Kevin Durant. Everybody loves Kevin Durant's game. Like, I just, yes, he also has incredible form. I mean, I think the Dallas Mavericks, their account on Threads, their official account or whatever, they did this cool edit where they just put like, I think it was like 20 of Dirk's jumpers all together and just made it into like a GIF, pretty much GIF, however you say it. And, it's just cool. I mean, same with Kevin Durant. He's got that jumper. Like, it's undeniable. It's completely repeatable. It's so signature and recognizable. And it's just beautiful,
I think if KD didn't join the Warriors, he'd be the most liked player in the NBA.
Yeah, I think so too. I heard him on a space before I left Twitter. He was on a space that
he's
I
freaking Aquarius,
and I jumped in there, and I just and he was like kind of criticizing. It was like I think it was a Lakers space, and he was like criticizing them for how they consume basketball and just saying, you guys talk about basketball as if it's individual players only, and you never talk about the team sport and like how somebody helps their team. And he's like, I just think you can.
Have you ever spent any time in a Lakers space?
Not really.
No,
they're the most toxic,
not much time.
wastes of time.
I go
the
in
way
and
they
for 5 seconds.
Watching a car crash, I absolutely can't pull myself away from it. But I feel
I enjoyed hopping in after bad Lakers losses because they lose their fucking minds. But it is not the way to consume basketball. The way they react and talk about the game is the most toxic, radioactive way of consuming the game you can get.
They are so harsh, like so harsh. Like I glory in their downfall. I absolutely left Lakers fandom because it was the most entitled fucking bunch of asshats who thought that they should win every single game, and if not, just buy more wins,
Yeah.
And I mean, obviously there's good Lakers fans. I'm not dissing the fans. And in fact,
SoCal, there's quite a few great Lakers
fans. I grew up
less so.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think growing up in the 80s in Southern California, it was hard not to be a Lakers fan. Like, it was the only team on TV, etc. But anyways, so they still are like that, though. They think they should win everything. And it's like, so I sort of glory in the car crash. But the worst part for me was listening to them just like fucking shit on Russell Westbrook all the time. I love Russ. Like,
yeah,
I don't want to hear that about somebody. And like, they get really personal about it, which is also weird in my opinion. I know there was like some super dramatic ones where like Russ's brother would show up and defend him and stuff. But yeah, rough. Rough. I just kind of, I mean, when I decided to like cut Twitter out of my life, that was like a part. I mean, I think to a certain extent, a lot of the spaces were a little toxic.
Yeah.
Even some of ours, I found.
In the middle of the season, it got pretty bad sometimes, especially in regards to Davion.
Well, I got like labeled as like the Davion defender, and then like every time somebody had something to say about Davion, it was like, well, aren't you gonna like defend? And it was like, dude, like that, like
he had a bad game, right?
I just watch him. Like I don't, like I'm not, I'm not in charge of like forming your basketball outlook. Like I don't know. I just don't like it when people just like shit on people.
Yeah.
Without giving them any leeway whatsoever. Anyway. Okay, so we are in dunk chapter. So the 1910 slam dunk with the cages, where somebody grabbed onto the cage to assist the dunk, right? And then this
The
is
idea
another,
that there was a cage in basketball is the most wild thing
it's
to
not
me.
crazy, I know, so funny. And because people were grabbing the ball out of the peach basket, because there was no hole, right? So you could just grab the ball from the balcony. I would have loved to be on one of those balconies. So then he says that probably shouldn't count as the first dunk. But so the word till 1936. So jump ball, slam dunk, probably right around within what, like 10, 15 years of each other, would you say?
Yeah.
Something like that. So this is like some massive development in basketball. It makes it a lot more fun, in a span of a number of years. So there's a lot of development happening before the 3-point development happens. It's just in a different, closer to the basket development, going over instead of out. It's vertical development, not horizontal, right? So anyways, again, I don't know that there's anything like stands out a lot to me from this
The
chapter.
dream talk about the dunk, that was wild.
Oh yeah. This was like, I think I had sort of like, I got to the ballet one and then the noodle one, and I was like, okay, I'm getting a little lost here, like what all this stuff, how this all feeds in. I'm still with it. Like I was still really enjoying it, but yeah, some of it I was like, okay. I do understand. I've had like flying dreams, and I understand what he's saying where it feels like flight.
Mm-hmm.
And I also appreciated that. Oh, and this is where he does the ballet stuff too. I appreciated that this build-up led to Michael Jordan, right?
Yeah.
Because Michael Jordan, for my generation, is like, there's no argument he's the greatest that I've ever seen. Like, I will never see another player like him. And it was all vertical greatness. Like, he flew. There was stuff that he did that you could not see with the naked eye. They had to like reinvent camera angles, and they had to slow down time. And like, I mean, now you could probably find somebody who could do a lot of the stuff that he did. But at the time, no one else was doing it. So, I appreciate that all of these other like avenues sort of led to that, like the ballet stuff, the body control stuff, the dream stuff as far as like being able to fly. And I mean, obviously the most famous picture of Michael Jordan that he uses as his brand logo and all that stuff is like he's actually fucking flying. Like,
yeah, Air Jordan.
Yeah, I mean, so then it goes in, and again, I'm like super nerdy about this stuff. I love the breaks of the game stuff on this too, of like where they talked about the development of the TV contracts, and then we know how important these TV contracts are to the CBA, right? So he doesn't talk about that here, but it's relevant as far as like innovating the spectatorship of the sport is so relevant in terms of how much money the league can make and therefore how much the players can make, etc. But I thought that all this stuff about like the slow motion innovation, CBS director Tony Burnett invented a strategy to expedite the process, and the first genuinely instant replay premiered during the fourth quarter of the 1963 Army-Navy football game. It would have made its debut early in the contest, but for Lucille Ball's semi-translucent head. The production crew recorded its replay clips on tapes carrying an old I Love Lucy episode and took 30 recordings before Mrs. Ball's visage disappeared.
This is tragic. I think it's tragic that they reuse tapes. Those tapes will be lost to time, kind of stuff. We do a very bad job at keeping history.
So funny.
I can't believe that they reuse tapes in the invention of replay. That's wild to me.
Totally new form of audience participation. Humble television viewer can now witness immediately and out of the flow of the game's action how certain events came to be. They learn to adopt the attitude of every artist to every artistic production. The public now demands that the game be changed so that they can see the process by which the effects are attained. So one ABC engineer and slow-mo pioneer, Bob Trackler, likened it to smoking a cigarette after you've had sex and reflecting back on it. Was it good? How was it? That was slow motion videotape. Slow motion replays showcase unusual balance and delicate touch of these sports giants to gush the Boston Globe.
Watching a game on TV is a totally different view of insight than going to a game in person.
Yeah.
There's times where I feel like going in person, you are actually missing out on quite a bit because you don't have the commentary, you don't have the replay, you don't have the insight. It makes
you record them when you go in person. I record them too.
I don't. I probably should,
especially for like a really especially exciting game. I will come back from Golden One Center.
Yeah.
And watch the game because I want to see. Oh, how did the commentators react to this? Oh, I want to see this on slow mo. I want to see the different angles on this. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
I do that too. Yeah, and I'll save the ones I love. Like I don't save them all, but I'll save like really good. Like I still have the Clippers game.
Yeah.
I mean, I didn't go to that one in person, obviously, but I do that too. I didn't go to any games last year because I had tickets to go to the playoffs, and we got COVID.
Yeah.
And so we couldn't go.
It sucks.
I know.
I believe I caught COVID from the Kings game, the playoffs game I went to.
I wouldn't doubt it. I thought about going anyway, but I couldn't do it as like a moral human being, and I really did feel like shit. So
I did not realize I had COVID until I came back from the game in Golden State. I felt bad about that.
So slow-mo is essential for the event. Without it, fans wouldn't have been able to fully comprehend the superhuman elevation of winner Larry Nance. Roll the tape back, and yet he really is just hanging there in midair, looking down at the rim. So, I mean, I think stills really do this as well. Like on social media, I think some of the photographs that some of the good photographers take during the game
crazy.
Are like, holy shit, like how was he there? You know?
There's a reason that they call them poster moments, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So, and then I just thought, Sacramento Bee sports writer S.L. Price wrote, only when it was shown on the screen again did those in attendance realize what they had seen. Michael Jordan drifting in slow motion towards the basket, mouth open, eyes wide, leaning toward the basket like an apple picker on a ladder. So, I mean, I think you can say that some of the most famous, more recent moments in basketball have been greatly augmented by this technology that was invented in some cases specifically for these events.
Yeah. Right. Like without replay, how important would that chase down block in the 2016 finals be, right?
Yeah.
Some of these moments were made by the TV spectacle in the moment.
Yeah. So for Jordan, slow motion replays worked as a multiplier of sorts. Like a ballet dancer, he already knew how to manipulate his body to make it look like he was floating. When you look at the physics of jumping, there's really no such thing as hang time, he said in a 1993 interview. There's just the perception of it, the appearance of hanging in the air. I use my legs, some arm movements like flapping wings, but it's more illusion than anything. So, and it talks about how he didn't really even know until he watched the playback.
Yeah, that's wild.
What it looked like, how impressive it was. And then it taught, so.
Hey, I got less rest this weekend than I get during the work week, so I gotta go to bed early tonight. I'm an old man.
Okay.
So, I'm gonna.
Should we stop and do
We
another
can try to
one?
wrap
Or should I
up.
just try and go?
Do you have
just-
any other notes that you wanted to talk on? I think we should just try to wrap it up.
Yeah.
Yeah,
We're most of the way through. I think the only notable chapter for me after this is the triangle chapter. I think
Yeah.
the idea of the perfect scheme, I think, is too arrogant, and that's why I kind of fell out of favor. The triangle, I think they went really in depth with the triangle, and I thought it was fascinating how in depth they went, and it provides a lot of insight. But unfortunately, that's all irrelevant because nobody runs the triangle. Yeah, I really enjoyed the triangle chapter.
I agree.
I liked it because they basically, I think it came to came to the conclusion that it's basically about getting to know your teammates and chemistry is what the triangle was really all about. Was like knowing your teammates like the back of your hand. That's what it was.
Well, I thought it's so funny that he says like they actually gave out like the notebook to the other teams.
Yeah.
And they're like, what are you doing? Like they're gonna figure out our plan. He's like, no, they won't understand. Like, and it's just all. I mean, again, going back to the Pete Carril stuff, it's just fundamentals like passing to somebody where they want the pass, right? I mean, and the triangle was really just about making a triangle on the floor in all different places, and having those strong forwards to help you.
It was like a system that emphasized that made it so that players had good high IQ and passing awareness and stuff. It was like a mandatory element in the system, and that's why it doesn't work for a lot of teams, is that you have to have the right pieces for it to actually work. But there's a reason like Golden State steals parts of the triangle in their actual offense. Like this stuff is important. Because good teamwork is how you win. There's a good way to win a championship. There's all sorts of ways to win, but
and this part, I mean, but effective team defense often manifests itself in the things that you don't see, right?
Yeah.
You're making things not happen, so it's pretty hard to quantify those things. I mean, I think that modern analytics does a good job of like you can say like, okay, OG Anunoby like is people are shooting 20.1% against him from the 3-point line, and then you can go back and they're a 39% shooter, so that kind of thing. But actually knowing what things would have happened without the defense is impossible.
Mm-hmm.
And then it talks about zone defenses. This turtle shell thing, I was not super on board with that one. And then it talks about flopping in here, which again is relevant. These kind of like arm movements that, and I wonder if anything like this will be a part of what the refs study to call the flopping calls. If there will be certain body movements that they use as indicators of a flop. And that'll be kind of interesting to track over the course of this season since it's a new call.
I wonder how much the reactions after the movement will dictate those calls, because players who flop, like oftentimes they're like laying on the ground, trying to emphasize it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. We'll see. Hopefully
it'll discourage some of the wanking. And the crybabying, and then switching. I mean, again, like it's watching switching, and then like I think the Spaced Out book did such a great job of like describing switching, and even Built to Lose, he talks a lot about switching. So, and John, did you have any? Let's see, how far am I in here now?
Like 70% through the book.
Yeah, I didn't do any review beyond. I like the selfish assist. The definition of selfish assist sounds pretty.
Yes.
Nice.
Yeah, I read
selfish assist record title.
I read that and thought of like players like Luka, where they get triple doubles, but their triple doubles don't feel the same as Jokic's triple doubles. Whereas like. And maybe it's talent.
I think it's a team roster construction thing with Luka in particular. But I think we had Rondo on our team, right? Rondo
Yeah.
was a selfish passer.
Yeah.
A
And
selfish passer. That's a great terminology right there.
yeah, and you can tell when players are trying to get assist numbers up.
Well, the whole Wilt thing made me really want to read his book because the issues included, but we're not limited to the overpopulation problem, euthanasia. He's pro.
It sounds like a good next book then.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sounds pretty. We're gonna go to Weird Town this time.
Well, this one was weird.
Yeah, this book is strange. I think it's gonna be weird. But whatever.
But this is still irrelevant that Wilt really was pissed at Bill Russell all the time because Bill won all the championships, he won all the awards, he won all the shit.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, Wilt had all the stats.
The narratives that the media generates really does have too much impact on the league sometimes.
Sometimes I agree. I know I was wrong. He concedes about abandoning granny-style free throws, even though you may recall that he thought it made him look like a sissy. Not trying to check boxes.
The Will didn't this random Bulls player who for the NBA for the All-Star game because of the media narrative he was talking about. He's a personality.
Yeah.
I think Wilt might be in paperback only and not expensive, but just I don't know. His actual autobiography. There's other biographies of him, but
oh really?
I want to read the autobiography. Sure, we're gonna read that.
Yeah, because Wilt, in his own words, is probably the least accurate biography you could ever get.
Yeah.
Well, that's what I think we're kind of going for the experience, not for the accuracy.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
The subtext tells you more about Wilt than the actual text.
So it's this one, Wilt. Well, where'd it go? Wilt, just like any other 7-foot black millionaire who lives next door, right?
I think that's it.
Yeah, that's the first one. I think he has two. One, he looks. The pictures on the covers look different, way different.
Yeah.
Him. I think this book we're reading said he had two, and but the first one is Wilt.
This one, Amazon has the hardcover for $6 and the paperback for $40. What?
Doesn't make any sense.
That's weird.
Only one in stock.
Yeah. Okay. So let me see so he talks a lot about LeBron, and I'm going to go really, really fast. I thought that was funny. People like Elon Musk just launching satellites into the space junk, clouding the entire sky.
Space junk's going to get a problem in the near future. It's going to get
space junk. There's a really good Nova about space junk, and it's old too, but even 10 years ago or whatever, it was massively concerning. Talking about how guys like to get their passes. Davion talked about
that's really interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a part of team chemistry, though, too, right? Is guys getting the ball where they want to get, where they need to get it, where it's optimal for them to shoot it from.
This really changed my perspective on LeBron and watching him and watching how he passes to other teammates. It gave me a lot more appreciation for kind of the greatness of LeBron than I ever had before.
Yeah. The mid-range theory has a big chapter on how he became a three-point playmaker instead of a three-point shooter, which has a lot of the same kind of interesting commentary on his facilitation. Yeah, and I was much more into LeBron before he was a Laker. I don't watch him as much anymore.
I was getting older. It's hard.
It's not the
still
same.
Impressive. It's not the same. Yeah.
Yeah. Plus, when you don't have shooters around you, which he hasn't for the last couple of years, your playmaking is affected, right? I mean, I mean, the same thing with like Domas in the playoffs, in my opinion. Like, no one else could make a shot, so you can't say Domas sucked. Like, you got to he's the facilitator. Like, you got to make a shot to help him be good, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that was one thing about the defense chapter in this book that I thought was worded really well, is that he was talking about how, like, what a center, I think it was saying, like, if I'm really doing my job defensively, that means all the numbers go down, which is not what most analysts want to see. Most analysts want to see better numbers, right? But if I'm preventing stuff, those numbers don't exist.
Yeah, they really need to work on defensive metrics.
Yeah. 7 seconds or less, the triangle, again, like, yeah, I mean, the triangle stuff is really interesting. I would be mildly interested in looking at that notebook thing that they talk about.
Seems like it'd be a dry read.
I think it probably would be, yeah. But
they had a whole section about talking about how weird and impossible to interpret it is.
Yeah. I mean, Tex was basically the Lakers' Pete Carroll, right? The Kings were running the Princeton system, well, a variation of it, and then the Lakers are running this triangle. And then he talks about Rube Goldberg machines, the OK Go video, et cetera, which is, again, Rube Goldberg machines are really freaking cool.
Yeah.
But he talks about how if one piece in the system is faulty or doesn't work or can't figure it out, everything fails, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so you have to find that element that is stopping the whole system, and you need to make each part of the system as reliable as possible. All right.
And then the last chapter was the rebounding chapter.
Yeah. Bouncing back.
And that was not correct.
The one thing he said here that stood out to me is that there's more rebounds in a game than there are points, which I always look at rebounds by team, so that had never really occurred to me that way. But I think that's interesting.
That's what I was thinking, trying to remember, but is that what he said?
Yeah, he says it here. But this dereliction of accounting never stopped anyone from actually... Oh, it's just something you have to do. Maybe I didn't... Let's see. Rebounds both power basketball's perpetual motion machine and account for its directional flow. Nevertheless, the NBA didn't think to record... He does say that, but maybe I didn't...
Yeah.
Probably wrong.
And I didn't verify it either, but I think it's true that there's more rebounds in a game than there are points. Made points, right?
Hmm.
Then he talks about bubble.
Made field goals, perhaps, yeah.
Yes, right.
Usually the percentage is less than 50%. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yes. Yeah.
The Rodman stuff was interesting.
Yes, Rodman stuff, and I feel like we've talked about that before, but I can't remember what the context was. It may have been in Spaced Out, where they talk about Rodman was famous for having this mental map. Also, but like in Breaks of the Game, he talks about how Jeff Petrie, I would say it wrong, could rebound all his, do 8 or 10 shots in a row and rebound them all. But then the spatial analysis book talked about how, long shots make long rebounds, and how offensive rebounding has gone consistently down as 3-point percentage has gone up almost, relationally, which is partially due to the fact that, people are less aware of where those long rebounds are going. But also because of fast breaks, right? Because everybody's trying to fast break off of a miss. So there's more competition. And that's it. We did it. Yay.
Yay.
So what do you want to read this Wilt book, or the other one that I had is it's called The Cap, and it's about David Stern. I don't know how to get back to it.
Oh, that'd be interesting.
Let me see, did I have it up? It's about David Stern and the lawyer whom we discovered or talked about in Breaks of the Game.
The Cap, how Larry Fleischer and David Stern built the modern NBA.
Larry Fleischer.
That's a pretty new book. It was released, or audible release date. When was the real?
Is there an audio book?
Yeah.
Yeah, there is.
I need somebody to read to me.
Helps with drives.
Oh, thank God. All right, yeah.
Yeah.
I'm all for books with audiobooks.
With audio?
Yeah.
I mean,
Okay, you guys that listen to audiobooks, 12 hours and 50 minutes. How many pages is that, roughly? Very roughly.
It's probably, I don't know. It depends on the size of the book, but like 500 pages or so.
Kindle says 368 for print length, but that could be off. I've seen that be way off in the past. I'm just trying to just
12 hours sounds more.
Cool.
Somebody's gonna have to read the wacky Wilt book out loud and record it.
Oh man, if I could find a way to invent something to have Wilt read it. Ooh, AI.
Oh my God. That'd be so awesome.
Dude, the AI audio stuff is getting very good.
Yeah,
It's only a matter of time.
I have Snoop Dogg read all of my business articles to me.
Oh my God.
It's
Awesome.
Okay.
All right.
No better note to end it on than that. So.
Yeah.
There you go. All right, y'all.
Amazing night.
Have a great night.
See ya.
Yeah.